The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Capehart with the APS Technical Assistance Resource Center. I'm the lead for technical assistance here at the APS TARC. Welcome to the webinar. The title of today's webinar is How to Reframe Elder Abuse, and I'll introduce our speakers shortly. Today's webinar is a formula grant only webinar, so you're only on the line with your other administrators who've received formula grants, and we're tackling this issue today because we saw that so many states were going to be addressing public awareness issues in their spend plans for their formula grant. So we hope that you'll find it beneficial. Next slide. A quick disclaimer before we get started. The National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System and the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center, APS TARC, are a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, administered by WRMA Incorporated. Contractors and or speakers' findings, conclusions, points of view do not necessarily represent U.S. Administration for Community Living, AOA, DHHS official policy. So next slide. A quick note about our APS TARC. If you are newer to APS or you're not terribly familiar with us, we're here to help APS programs any way that we can. Just reach out to us. We'll have a final slide with contact info, although I believe everybody on this call already knows our contact info. We work to enhance the effectiveness of APS programs by working with partners on use of data and analytics, applying research and evaluation to practice, and encouraging the use of innovative practices and strategies. And the APS TARC has some extra funding to help people with their formula grant issues. So if you have anything that you're wrestling with, please get a hold of us. That's why we're here, is to help you. Next slide. Little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Today's slides are available to download in the handouts section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Just click on the icon that looks like a little piece of paper. All participants are muted for this webinar. You can use your computer or your telephone to access audio, either one. Just adjust the volume of your computer or your phone to the desired level. If you have any problems with the audio or viewing the presentation, my suggestion is that you exit the webinar and then re-enter. You can also reach out to us and we'll try our best to troubleshoot, but there's lots of different reasons why you might be having issues, so we may not be able to fully resolve it. Just know that we are recording this and that you'll be able to view it at another time if you run into too many problems. Next slide. If you have questions of our presenters, simply type them into the questions box at any time. You can also, if you like, raise your hand. There's a button on your GoToWebinar control panel. It's looks like a little hand. You can click that to raise your hand, and that will mean that you're asking me to unmute your line, which is what I will do. So you can go either route. You can type questions in the questions box, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. As I said earlier, it is being recorded. We'll make the recording available to everyone who has registered for this webinar on the Huddle app, which everyone should have access to. If you do not, reach out to us and we'll fix that for you. You'll also receive an automatically generated email within 24 hours that includes a link to a certificate of attendance, just in case you want that or need that for some reason. Next slide. So I have the honor of introducing our speakers today. We have Alyssa Neumann and Alicia Cisneros. Alyssa Neumann received her Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from the University of California, Berkeley in 2014. And I'm ad-libbing this part. I believe she just received a master's degree, I think in city planning. Allie, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong with that. So congratulations to her. She has over 5 years of experience supporting public service organizations and communications, event coordination, and internal operations. She's now a project coordinator for the National Center on Elder Abuse. Currently, she is coordinating an NCEA project with the Frameworks Institute, disseminates a new evidence-based communication strategy on the issues of elder abuse, and I believe that's what we're talking about today. And then Alicia Cisneros serves as the outreach coordinator at the National Center on Elder Abuse at the NCEA. She works to forge new meaningful connections between local and national communities, elder justice and aging professionals, and other stakeholders. Alicia earned a master's degree in social work at the University of Southern California, Suzanne Dworak Peck School of Social Work. She has a background in clinical social work with experience providing direct support in medical and in-home settings with older adults. I think we're very fortunate to have these two women with us today. Thanks to both of you so much for being here, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here today and to be sharing the Reframing Elder Abuse project with you all and how to really use this communication strategy to engage your audiences.
Great. Thank you so much. So before we go ahead and get started, we're going to go over our objectives for today. This is Allie or Alyssa, and Andy introduced us this afternoon already. So during today's webinar, you are going to learn what is the Reframing Elder Abuse project that we're going to be discussing today. And then you're going to review the research that informs the project. And we're lastly going to learn some tips, or I'm going to teach you some tips so that you can know how to practice applying this research into your everyday communications practices. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. First things first, what is the Reframing Elder Abuse project? Well, like any good project that goes on within our organizations, I'm sure all of you are familiar, a lot of projects start off with a problem, right, within our organizations. And we at the National Center on Elder Abuse, which is a resource center on elder abuse, some of you might be aware, we realized that we had a major communications problem within our agency. We had all of these materials such as flyers or social media posts and websites to help us spread awareness on our issue of elder abuse, but we had no idea if the message was getting across. We didn't know if the flyers that we were sharing and advertising were increasing understanding of the broader causes and consequences of elder abuse. And we didn't even know if it was helping them to understand solutions and getting those solutions out there as well. So that was a major communications problem. So from there, we worked with an organization called the Frameworks Institute, which Andrew or Andy referenced earlier. The Frameworks Institute is an organization that does communications research to figure out if the way that you're talking about your social issue is actually productive with the public. And when we say productive, it means getting them to understand the broader causes and consequences and solutions to your issue. And when we're talking about the public, we're talking about lay people who perhaps have never even heard of the social issue of elder abuse at all. So we worked with the Frameworks Institute to next use public understandings research to create a new communication strategy that is productive with the public. We've used these public understandings to help us avoid the concepts, avoid certain concepts that were found to be communications barriers and advance the concepts that we want to advance. Next, we're on to the third part of the Reframing Elder Abuse project. So the third part involves dissemination. As the lead center for elder abuse in the nation, we need to disseminate this communication strategy as much as possible. Get people to understand what concepts to avoid in advance. And that's why we're here with you today doing this webinar. We know that a lot of you want to use your formula grants for public awareness, and we're here in the hopes that you'll learn this strategy and come out with some tips that you can incorporate into your public communications. So next, Alicia is going to present the SWAMP.
Thank you, Allie. So Allie mentioned how the Frameworks Institute did research to see how the public conceptualizes elder abuse. So we're going to present their findings using the SWAMP of elder abuse. The swamp of elder abuse is a metaphor of a swamp to synthesize the research findings and really get a grasp of the good things and the bad things in the swamp of elder abuse. So there can be rocks or sticks in the mud or alligators that can halt you in a swamp. But there are also useful items in swamps like lily pads. So what goes on in people's minds when they think about elder abuse works similarly. There are good things and bad things, productive thoughts or cultural models on elder abuse that you can leap your messaging off, like a lily pad. Or there are unproductive understandings on elder abuse, like the alligators, rocks, or sticks in the mud that could eat your message or halt it entirely. Now, let's have Ali introduce some of the unproductive understandings that exist among the public right now that make it hard for our elder abuse public awareness messaging to get through.
Thank you, Alicia. All right, so I'd like to start off with the unproductive, starting off with the bad things first. Let's get them out of the way. So, like we said, that there is unproductive cultural models or understandings that the Frameworks Institute found during their first phase of communications research on elder abuse. So Frameworks Institute went out, they went to the malls of America, and they asked people, what do you think about elder abuse? And here's some of the unproductive notions that they found, or the sticks in the mud, the alligators, or the rocks that can interfere with our elder abuse messaging from the swamp of elder abuse metaphor. So, though elder abuse remains a less familiar concern, the American public is able to draw on separate understandings regarding abuse in older age for reasoning regarding the topic. The first cultural model that the Frameworks Institute found that is really common among the public is the elder plus abuse cultural model. The public devotes little attention to the issue of elder abuse. They also have difficulty understanding self-neglect and experience discomfort and difficulty thinking about sexual abuse, which can prevent constructive engagement with the topic. Non-expert pre-existing assumptions tend to construct elder abuse as a relationship between the perpetrator and the victim, typically casting older people as powerless and vulnerable. Activating these assumptions is likely to reinforce stereotypes of older people as passive, vulnerable beings. People assume that sexual abuse has to do with sexual desire. Because they think of older people as non-sexual, passive beings, they have difficulty thinking about this type of elder abuse. So what this means is that it might be optimal for communicators on elder abuse to perhaps start with an easier to understand type of elder abuse, such as physical or emotional or financial, before getting into sexual abuse or self-neglect, which are harder to understand. We want to make sure to prime the public a little bit more before we go ahead and start off with these typically hard to understand topics of sexual abuse or self-neglect. So we recommend leading with physical or emotional abuse first, and then expanding a lot more on self-neglect and sexual abuse later. And remember to not to focus so much on the victim-perpetrator relationship, but focus on the broader causes and collective consequences and solutions to the issue. The next cultural model that the Frameworks Institute found was really popular among the public was kind of overlaps a little bit with the first elder plus abuse cultural model. The deterioration cultural model maintains that Americans hold the widespread belief that aging is a process of deterioration and dependency. And this triggers patterns of paternalistic thinking that deny older people agency. Reasoning from this model leads people to the fatalistic conclusion that abuse is inevitable because older adults are inherently vulnerable. So think about this in your everyday work as communicators. Think about whether you are defining older adults as inherently dependent or vulnerable. Are you overemphasizing dependency or vulnerability more than you need to? Avoid activating these assumptions by not overusing terms like vulnerable, victim, or dependency among non-experts. Think about how you can even portray a more accurate image of aging among lay people by showing a variety of capacities, abilities, and ages among older adults. Think about how you're communicating with older adults. Are you communicating in a patronizing way? For example, are you standing when an older adult is sitting down, or are you even talking to the older adult, or just talking to perhaps a younger family member? Although the Framers Institute interviewed a lot of lay people, non-experts, these pre-existing assumptions or cultural models exist within ourselves as well. So we need to watch out for that too. The deterioration cultural model may be popular, not just among the public, but can be popular among everyone in our society. The next cultural model that the Framers Institute found was popular among the public was modern life is the problem. This cultural model is defined as the public commonly making sense of the prevalence of elder abuse by reasoning that societal changes have placed a constant strain on people who care for older adults. Mounting stress paired with the devaluation of older people and the belief that nursing homes are an unfortunate necessity join together to explain the inevitability of abuse. While this model encourages the public to consider societal factors, it also works to reinforce a sense of fatalism about elder abuse by linking it to deep and unseemingly unchangeable trends. For example, how could we change something so nebulous and so big as modern life? Communicators should avoid words or phrases and stories that activate this fatalistic model. For example, do not use a story or justify abuse in a situation because of modern life trends. The next cultural model that the Framers Institute found was spotlight on individuals. The American public believes that elder abuse is primarily the consequence of individual characteristics of the people directly involved, the victim and the perpetrator. You'll notice a lot of overlapping between all of these different cultural models because they're so prevalent in our society, both among professionals and the public. They focus on the attributes of the perpetrator and the victim and largely fail to see how structures and systems shape the context behind elder abuse. They tend to attribute the cause of elder abuse to personal weaknesses, such as the perpetrator's greed, laziness, or other moral failings. Or they can blame the perpetrator for poor mental or physical health. This obstructs people's abilities to see the broader social and systemic factors that contribute to or help to prevent and address elder abuse. As a result, the public tends to have difficulty moving beyond the condemnation of perpetrators or victims to engage in solutions-oriented thinking. For example, many members of the public are unfamiliar with what adult protective services is, or they don't even know that elder abuse could lead to mortality. So it might be necessary for us as communicators to define who APS is when talking to non-experts and to minimize language that overemphasizes victims and blames the perpetrators of abuse. It is also recommended that communicators discuss the broader consequences of elder abuse, not just in individual terms, but in the broader terms, such as costs on the economy or healthcare. Another notion that was common from the spotlight on individuals models was that everyone is responsible or no one is responsible. Because the public does not understand systemic contributions or solutions to elder abuse, they have little knowledge regarding their role in helping to reduce and address elder abuse in our society. They loosely agreed that everyone was responsible for solving elder abuse, but they assumed that others will take action, which diffused their own responsibility. So as communicators, we need to make sure that we are increasing the accountability language within our materials or engagement with the public. And we can easily do this by talking about this issue in a collective manner using terms like we and us instead of they or them. So next, Alicia is going to talk about the good things that the Frameworks Institute was able to find.
Yes, thank you, Allie. So there were productive understandings from the swamp as well. So let's review these lily pads that can really help us as communicators. The first lily pad was the agreement that elder abuse is unacceptable. The public understands elder abuse is not right. And this is a productive understanding. We can expand on the elder abuse is wrong notion when explaining the issue. The second productive understanding was the public expressed they do think that caregivers are pushed to the limit. This illustrates some understanding of outside pressures or missing supports for caregivers as contributing to elder abuse. We could use this understanding to explain elder abuse and then go into other contributors as well, such as research or social isolation, lack of awareness, or trainings. So Allie, if you can help us to further understand what we do next now that we know the productive and unproductive understandings of the swamp.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so when it came to solutions to elder abuse, there were both productive and unproductive understandings. So the public did understand that support for caregivers could help to prevent elder abuse and that more awareness and education on elder abuse was needed. But the current awareness and education that exists today is primarily focused on after the fact solutions, such as surveillance and prosecution, instead of preventative solutions, such as increasing social support, research, or changing policy. So ultimately, the public, they were very fatalistic on whether elder abuse could truly be solved and thought nothing could be done. This is particularly popular. We've noticed at the NCEA on social media, we have noticed this as well when we go to public awareness, health fairs, etc., where there's kind of this notion that well, elder abuse is inevitable. There's not much that we can do about it because older adults are inherently vulnerable. So this is why we have the Reframing Elder Abuse Project. And let's figure out a new way to talk about elder abuse that is productive with the public.
Right. So we now know about the swamp and the sticks and the mud and the lily pads that go with it. But what do we get out of it? The Reframing Elder Abuse Project will be the bridge to a more effective communication strategy. After the Frameworks Institute did their research on what's in the swamp of elder abuse, we worked with them to use these understandings to determine what to avoid and what to advance in our communications. From there, we came up with the structure of justice narrative. This is a new way to talk about elder abuse that uses a value and metaphor to avoid barriers in the swamp and instead enhance public understanding of the 1, cause, 2, consequences, and 3, solutions to elder abuse. So the first step in the structure of justice narrative is to talk about why your cause, elder abuse prevention, matters. We use a common American value, justice. This value was tested by the Frameworks Institute, and it helps us to promote collective responsibility and boost support for our issue among the public. So in this first step, you can start off by saying something like, A just society works to make sure everyone is free from the threat of abuse at every stage of life. In order to live up to our ideal of justice for all, we need to work to address the social issue of elder abuse. Here we are emphasizing that American value of justice. Now, Ali will help you to work in the next couple steps.
Thank you, Alicia. So the next step in the structure of justice narrative is to discuss what elder abuse is about and how does it work. In order to do this, we can use an example and a metaphor to explain the answers to these questions. A metaphor is sticky. It is a figure of speech that, for rhetorical effect, directly refers to one thing by mentioning another. The Frameworks Institute is very fond of metaphors, if you haven't noticed already, from the metaphor of the swamp of elder abuse, because it helps to communicate about an issue, and it helps you communicate about an issue with an easy picture, a easy picture that allows the public to understand, and it sticks in one's mind over time. So the metaphor that they found for us when talking about elder abuse is talking about a structure with beams to help the public understand how various services come together to prevent and address elder abuse. For this second step in the structure of justice narrative, you can even go into an example. At the NCA, we like to use the example of George. George is age 77, as seen in this photo, and he reminds us why elder abuse is an important issue. George spends most of his time at home alone since his wife died, and his daughter lives too far away to visit regularly. His neighborhood lacks reliable public transit and many age-friendly civic spaces. So this means fewer social interactions, which means fewer opportunities for walking and talking or laughing. So with these normal health experiences missing, George's physical and cognitive and emotional health have gotten worse. His daughter does not know what she can do or where she can turn to for help. Without a structure of support, it is easy to see if George encountered an unsafe situation. The problem might go unnoticed. So we can see from this example of George that we broaden the story out. So although we used an individual case, we broadened this case out to talk about how this social isolation is not uncommon. With millions of fellow Americans living in similar situations, it's fair to say that our nation's social structure needs repair. Just as one beam alone cannot support a building, individuals and family members alone cannot single-handedly manage the problem of social isolation and the corresponding risk of maltreatment. So here we use this example, we broadened it out, and then we use the structure to help people understand that there's some missing supports here that can result in the risk of elder abuse. So notice how our individual case example, although it has a person of interest, which is George is actually not the key player in this story. The key player in this story is the missing support beams that has led to social isolation and the risk of elder abuse. So if you're ever going to use an individual case, make sure to focus on the broader causes and consequences instead of just the victim-perpetrator relationship, as we mentioned before. And use the structure metaphor to help people understand that. So a strong and just society is like a structure supported by many beams. We need strong beams that are frequently maintained. You can think of these beams as the policies and programs that reinforce the relationships and resources needed for health, happiness, and safety. When those support beams are missing or not maintained, the structure is weaker and may not meet our expectations that people are able to live free from maltreatment. So the next step for the structure of justice narrative is talking about what you can do. What are the solutions to elder abuse? To fulfill this step, you can say something like, the good news is that there are many ways to strengthen our social supports through policy, services, and programs that keep us integrated in our communications as we age. The NCEA customizes our solutions based on our audience. So you might want to say something like, we can think about the role of transportation in reducing social isolation and adjusting systems so that we can all continue to move throughout our communities as we age. We can develop programs to educate families and professionals who work with older adults to understand the importance of preventing isolations, how to spot the warning signs of maltreatment, and what to do to address abuse or neglect. And you can go on and on about different policies and programs. And like I said, we customize the solutions that we talk about depending on our audience. So if we're talking to policymakers, we have a completely different set of solutions that we want to address. We might talk about funding needs, for example. If you're talking to the public, you might want to talk about public transportation, as I mentioned here. You can also talk about community centers that work as intergenerational spaces and allow older people to build relationships and participate in the work, play, and life of our neighborhoods. So things like this are really important because, as we noticed from the swamp of elder abuse, when it came to solutions, they were pretty. Things are pretty bleak. They were pretty fatalistic about solutions. So make sure that you're including solutions here. So here's just some examples of the solutions that we go over oftentimes within our public communications. We talk about community centers, public transportation. We also talk about educational programs. But when we talk about educational programs, we like to talk about how we need to educate people on how to prevent isolation and recognize the warning signs, and also talk about how people can get involved within their communities. So make sure that when you're talking about solutions, you're talking about what these individuals can do themselves to help out with helping to solve elder abuse, and connecting it back to those direct structural beams that we talked about in our metaphor. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with examples. So let's check out some examples of how the NCEA has applied the Reframing Elder Abuse project within our own communications materials. So this is an example of the NCEA's Red Flags of Abuse material. It's very popular. It's actually our most popular flyer. And right away we can tell that there's some items from the swamp in our material. The items in the swamp that you can see are the vulnerable elder adult as dependent and vulnerable notion from the cultural models of the swamp. You can see that in the photos here. The photos only show older adults as dependent and vulnerable. And it casts them as passive beings. And you can tell that because you cannot see any older adult eyes in these photos. So we didn't give older adults agency within these photographs. They're looking away, or their face is not even pictured here. So we want to make sure that we are not always casting older adults as vulnerable and dependent, because that can lead to the notions that, oh, well, older adults are just inherently vulnerable. So that means that that there's nothing we can do, or there's nothing they can do. But that's not true at all, because older adults can be a part of the solution just as much as anyone else can. So we want to make sure that we are not always casting older adults as vulnerable and dependent. You can also kind of notice a spotlight on individuals if you look closer at the text. So within the red flags of abuse piece, we go into the signs of abuse. And here you can see a lot of victim perpetrator language, which is something that we now try and avoid at the NCA. It says lack of amenities that victim could afford here. It also casts older adults as vulnerable in the second bullet point. And then in the third bullet point, it even connects back to a potential perpetrator of elder abuse. It says caregiver has control of elders' money, but is failing to provide for elders' needs. So within these signs of elder abuse, we're pretty hyper-focused on the victim-perpetrator relationship. However, we don't need to be. We could focus on just the signs of abuse. And it's also a little false here because a caregiver is not always the perpetrator of financial abuse or exploitation. So you notice how at the NCA, we had our own biases, our own cultural models going into this red flags of elder abuse piece. So now I'm going to show you, Alicia is going to show you the after version of this piece. She gets to do the fun part.
This is the best part because you get to see the after picture and our reframed items. So you can see that this publication no longer has those photos of older adults being portrayed as vulnerable. We really don't see anything about anybody looking away from the camera. We're really highlighting the actual content here. We're not highlighting victim perpetrator language and items like that. We're something that is quick, easy to remember. We have that red siren there. I can see immediately to take action and to keep an eye on the signs of the red flags of abuse here. And if we get a little bit closer to the text, you can see that we've really changed and reframed the way that we talk and disseminate these red flags to the public, right? So you can see the justice value after the take action immediately. Everyone at every age deserves justice. So we're really taking that collective approach now, and we're removing that victim-perpetrator relationship. We're not talking about somebody else managing an older adult's bank account. This is a collective issue that we should all keep an eye out together, not making this somebody should be taking care of somebody or somebody is doing something wrong, right? Highlighting that perpetrator. We really want to communicate effectively here and strengthen the systems of support and highlight community strength rather than those swampy communication tools that we had there before. Should we do another?
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think something important to note here as well, Alicia, is that when we took out all that victim, perpetrator, and vulnerability language, it left us so much more room in the piece. I was involved with the reframing of this material, and it left us so much more room to talk about actual solutions and the actual signs of elder abuse, which was the most important part of this red flags of abuse piece. So it's really enlightening to see the red flags of abuse change here. Okay. So now we'll go into our next example, which is from our information and referral line. This was we operate a technical assistance line where people can contact us regarding situations or any assistance that they need. And this is how we might respond to them initially if they call us about elder abuse assistance. We might say something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that this happened to you." And then we might start off by saying, "Seniors are a vulnerable audience, often preyed upon by unlicensed or unscrupulous people." So right away, you can see that vulnerable cultural model there. and preyed upon, which is a spotlight on individuals, the spotlight on that victim-perpetrator relationship. And real quickly, Alicia will go over the after version.
Yes, thank you. So now you see we're starting off with the pieces of the justice narrative. In a just society, everyone, highlighting the collective, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of age. I do want to highlight here that you see that we don't have every single part of the justice narrative on here, right? We wanted to keep it concise, and it didn't really apply or wasn't working with this particular sentence, and that's all right. As long as you're able to use those pieces of the justice narrative, you are creating a better form of communication than what we see here in the before part, and really engaging your audiences to hopefully be able to talk more effectively about elder abuse and have people convey that message as well down the line.
All right, great. Okay, so I think the main points of today is that we want you to take away is that framing isn't just about what we say, but it's also about what we choose not to say. This slide is from our quick start guide to talking about elder abuse from our communications toolkit that we will share with all of you. And you already have the slides here too, but it has the do's and don'ts about communicating on elder abuse. Just remember that we want to appeal to justice. We want to talk about the importance of social connections, demonstrate the collective solutions, explain the underlying social conditions that increase risk factors, and use that social structure metaphor to help you do that, to help you explain those underlying social conditions and the risk factors. And then lastly, provide solutions that emphasize collective responsibility and systemic policy changes, which is perhaps the most important part.
Great. So just as we wrap up today's webinar, we want to leave you with some reminders of some of the points that we touched on today. It's important to approach your communications with that collective style using we, us, all, everyone. We want to remind you to avoid the triggering images in your communication tools that have somebody appearing vulnerable, looking away from the camera, and also using that first person language and really honing in on the solutions. So you can use those GIFs that Ali was showing before, those images of community resources and those pillars. And we welcome you to use the NCEA resources, which highlight those already and are ready to go for you to apply into your own slides, presentations, brochures as needed.
Great. So with that, here's a slide of our resources. As I mentioned before, we have a communications toolkit, which has explanations of the Framers Institute's research, but it also has sample communications guides that are very useful, including like a frequently asked questions or a social media kit as well. There's a free online course if you enter the code VIAD2020. There's our sister project, which is Reframing Aging, which is a similar project, but that's about aging in general, how to communicate about aging in general. We also have a monthly tips e-newsletter, and you can utilize the materials that you've seen today, the GIFs or GIFs that Alicia talked about. The example of George is actually a public service announcement video that you can use as well, and the flyers from today too.
And before we go, I just want to remind everybody that WIAD is June 15th. I can't believe it's already June, but it's just around the corner. And if you don't know what WIAD is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. This is a call to action for society's individuals, organizations, and communities to educate each other on how to identify, address, and prevent elder abuse, so we can all do our part to support everyone as we age. And we're inviting you to join us this year in empowering older adults in our communities. We have a number of Reframe resources and campaigns that you are welcome to use and participate in. We're having a lot of fun this year, making sure that we are engaging with our communities in a safe way. We have caravan event guidelines, virtual bingos. We also have a virtual walk that we're all participating in. It's getting real competitive amongst us, trying to get the most steps in. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to use the links or reach out to us, and we'd be happy to connect you with our WeAdd microsite.
Great. Awesome. So, and I think that's it for the end of our webinar today. And just wanted to let everyone know that the WeAdd materials and toolkit those are all reframed. So, you know, you don't have to recreate the wheel here. We've got all these supplies for you to help with your reframing process as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and pass the mic to Andy for any question.
Thank you, Allie. And it's hard to believe that WeAdd is less than 2 weeks away. It seems like that just kind of happened out of nowhere. Maybe others feel the same way. Thank you so much for this information that you presented. I think it was very helpful for those who may have heard some of it before, because I know you've been preaching the word of reframing for quite a while. Hopefully this was a good refresher for you. We do have a couple questions, and now is the time to ask the questions. You can type them in your questions box, or you can raise your hand if you like, and I can unmute your line. Looks like I'm capable of doing that for everybody. So just go either route if you have any questions, but I'll jump into the two that we have so far. You mentioned paternalism earlier. Do you think ageism and paternalism are connected in any way?
Absolutely. This is Allie or Lissa. I absolutely agree, and it's actually what we have found. We have been partnering with the Reframing Aging Initiative, which the Gerontological Society of America facilitates that project, and they're trying to disseminate the word for their reframing strategies. And when the Framers Institute did the research on elder abuse, they did their research on the topic of aging in general at the same time. And they found that overlapping notion of paternalism, dependency, and vulnerability. So it's absolutely related to ageism within our society. Great question.
I think that makes perfect sense. So this next one is a little bit tricky, and I'll read it twice because it's a little longer. Any tips for APS programs that only serve vulnerable adults in reframing the population they serve? Again, any tips for adult protective services programs that only serve vulnerable adults in reframing the population that they serve?
That's a great question, and it's pretty similar to other questions that we've had regarding a lot of people ask, what do we do when the definition of elder abuse has the word vulnerable in it? We have to explain that they're vulnerable individuals, right? So I think that what's really important is that when we talk about reframing and avoiding and advancing, I think what we're really saying is don't overemphasize. Make sure you know what to overemphasize and underemphasize. And so if you need to use, talk about vulnerable individuals, make sure that you pair it with those broader causes, consequences, and solutions. And that way, you're ensuring that you're still talking in a reframed way, but you're not allowing those vulnerability terms to overpower the communications piece. So I think that's really, really important to consider. And, I would just say if you're having communications with individuals who I maybe consider vulnerable do the same thing. Don't overemphasize it with the person. Just like in that example we showed about the technical assistance, how we started off and we said, oh, we're so sorry, seniors are vulnerable. Because it allows the person to think maybe, oh, maybe it's my fault for being this way. That opens up a conversation on, or it makes them feel hopeless. And I've witnessed this within our own information and referral line when people contact us. And if I say something like that, they go on kind of a downward spiral from there, where they're like, oh, I'm just vulnerable. Oh my gosh, there's nothing I can do. And it feels that fatalism. They blame themselves. So I do not recommend talking about it with a person who may be considered, I guess, vulnerable or dependent in certain eyes or something like that. So that would be my advice. I hope that I answered that question for you. And if you have further questions, if this person has further questions, please feel free to email us too. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Allie. Yeah, I think you did answer that question for sure. If there are other questions out there in our audience, you can type them in the questions box at any time. We don't have any that are open right now. I would just remind folks that was mentioned a moment ago, there are some public awareness materials already available at the National Center on Elder Abuse website that you can use. So as I believe Allie said, no point in reinventing the wheel if those would work for you and if that's something that you can actually use. So. Again, now's the time to ask questions if you have any. Well, we have our two presenters captive.
Captives.
I should reframe the way that I said that, shouldn't I? I think. Yeah. That's
sweet. I like that. Reframe the way you said that. Yeah, so, always feel free. You're not holding us captive. We love talking about this. If you haven't noticed, we're really enthusiastic about this project, but we love talking to you guys, to you all, and please feel free to contact us at our email, which we've listed here. We also have a phone number. Actually, Alicia just received a reframing question recently on our information and referral line, and we were so stoked about it. So we're always available if you need it. Yeah, I'll just stay silent, just in case I'm like deterring anyone from questions.
No, I don't think you are. We have a small audience today, and there's not any other questions really waiting.
Okay.
Allie, if you don't care to go to the last slide real quick, I think everybody has this contact information, but if you don't, it's good to know the website for the APS TARC and the email address for the APS TARC. Reach out to us again. I said this in the beginning. Reach out to us at any time if there's anything that we can help you with, especially for the formula grant related matters, because we have some additional extra assistance just for the formula grantees. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's some way that we can help you. And just a big thanks again to Allie and Alicia for the information that you provided today. We really appreciate you being here and presenting the APS administrators with this info. The webinar has been recorded. It will be posted, I believe, to the Huddle service. Will make you aware of when that is posted. So if there's anyone that wasn't able to attend, they'll be able to watch it there. You can come back and revisit the webinar at any point. So thanks again to our speakers. Thanks again to all of our attendees today, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.